بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Naif Al-Uthaybi for inviting me to present an introduction to revenue cycle management. Thank you, Naif. I'm very happy and glad to be here. I would also like to thank and welcome all attendees who have taken time to join us this morning. I hope you enjoy this session and find it helpful. Let me tell you a bit about myself. I started my career back in 1998 as an accounting trainee in London. After 4 years in training, I joined the London Clinic Healthcare Group in Harley Street, where I worked for 7 years. During the time, we recorded some of the best growth rates in revenue and profitability margins in the whole of UK. We led major capital development and expansion plans in existing infrastructure as well as new services. We constructed one of the best in the world acute cancer care facility right in the heart of London's Harley Street. The hospital was inaugurated by Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II. I then went on to join a private equity investment house where I gained experience in non-healthcare businesses such as infrastructure management, softwares, anti-terrorist security, highways traffic management, and car parks. After 5 years in investments, I returned to healthcare and worked for Aspen Healthcare Group. In 2016, I wanted to do two things and did not know which one to do first. I wanted to found my own business, but at the same time gain experience in different geographical regions. At the end, I did both. I set up Chatham's International and also joined Fakih Healthcare Group in Jeddah. I later joined the Vision 2030 Office for Health and being managing the financial transformation projects. Before jumping into RCM, I think it is useful to understand some historic context. In 1852, Florence Nightingale first highlighted the need to understand cost and benefits of treatments provided to different patients with different illnesses. She also highlighted need for grouping the patients with similar illnesses so the patterns of treatment can be studied. She said there is a need for a system to categorize cases in order to analyze the cost and benefits of the treatment given to patients with different illnesses. I believe that it is necessary to classify cases so that they can be grouped according to illnesses and we can study the patterns of treatment. Florence Nightingale was undoubtedly well ahead of her time. After almost 150 years, care providers started to take her observations seriously. Today, the best care providers have implemented systems and processes to measure, analyze, and compare the cost and treatments provided to their patients. This helps them to ensure that always the best care is provided to their patients and in most cost-efficient manner. In order to achieve this, care providers record who, what, whom, outcome, and cost. For example, who provided what care to which patient, what were the clinical outcomes, and how much did it cost. In my experience, I have not come across many management terms as widely misunderstood as the revenue cycle management. Most clinicians see RCM as purely a finance or billing function designed to collect money. This is not entirely true. There are also other major misconceptions about RCM, and I would like to share a couple of examples with you today. Number one, I often hear that revenue cycle management is about business and not about the patient care. It is true that RCM makes the financial considerations of care providers more efficient and effective, but we must also recognize that patients and providers alike experience stress and financial strain when it comes to billing and insurance issues. RCM provides a system to address billing and insurance issues for care providers as well as for patients. I also often hear that RCM makes operations more complicated and leads to more problems than it solves due to the added level of documentation, communication, and cooperation with RCM or finance teams. The truth is again the opposite. Strong RCM function reduces breakdowns in communication, lack of documentation, and as a result improves efficiency across the board among medical, clinical, and administrative personnel. Here I would like to summarize the clinical benefits of having a robust RCM system in place. It improves patients' experience. It improves the clinical outcomes. It helps with the development of clinical protocols. It provides a clear view on patient journey from the point of admission to the point of discharge and payments collection. It helps with the safety and quality agenda of care providers. It enhances the quality of clinical documentation, and it improves the coordination among different teams at a care provider. Let's now have a look at the financial benefits of a robust RCM system. It helps with the understanding of financial profitability of different clinical services, such as pathology, radiology, wards, third parties such as insurers, corporates, medical services such as surgery, cancer, pediatrics, etc. The detailed financial data improves financial performance by identifying areas of concern. It also supports with developing the bottom-up budgets, value-based purchasing decisions, and demand projections. The superior quality of clinical data provides strong basis to reduce the claim denials from insurance companies. All in all, the superior quality of clinical and financial data assist the management with better and informed decision making. Let's have a look at the 7 functional elements of RCM which are essential to make the system work. The cycle starts from the point of scheduling an appointment and registering a patient. Once a patient is admitted and care delivery commences, recording of all services or charges patient receives must be recorded. Depending on patient type and at the point of discharge, the finance team will finalize the claims or bills and submit them for payment. Once the bills or claims are compiled and submitted, the process then moves on to the accounts receivable or collection teams within finance. The accounts receivable team is responsible for the collection and recording of payments against patient accounts. The accounts receivable team also ensures that no claims or bills fall overdue and are collected in a timely manner. Let's look at each of the elements in detail and understand what happens in each segment with more detail. Scheduling is when a patient gets in touch with the hospital looking to book an appointment to see a specialist. The admissions team will be booking an appointment and registering basic patient details. Admissions team will also inquire about symptoms to ensure patient is booked with the relevant consultant or specialist. It is very normal for patients to also request for an appointment with a specific consultant. The admission team will check the availability of requested consultant and book an appointment accordingly. During this phase, the admissions team also inquire about the method of payment and financial coverage. Patients paying from their own pocket and are not sponsored or covered by an insurer or corporate are classified as self-pay patients. Insured or sponsored patients are requested to provide proof of eligibility at the point of arrival. This is the most crucial step to safeguard a care provider from failure to get reimbursed for the provided services. All necessary data is collected from the patient, such as ID, country of residence, sex, age, etc. The method of payment, such as cash, insurance, embassy or company, are also identified and recorded on patient account. The financial coverage and eligibility is also re-verified. For example, a pre-authorization number would be required from an insured patient, letter of guarantee from embassy or corporate sponsored patients. In case of self-pay patients, and depending on care providers' policies, they may be asked to pay a deposit before the start of any care. During the registration phase or before, patients are also provided with estimate of cost for the treatment. The cost estimate depends on the type of patients. For example, a self-paying or cash patient will normally pay the standard rack rate. Insurance companies and embassies mostly have pre-agreed rates for their patients. It is also important to note that the cost estimation in this stage are compiled in collaboration with clinically and medically experienced staff. For example, a surgical patient looking for knee or hip replacement, the cost of prosthetic such as hip, knee, plaster, screws, etc. are also factored into the cost estimate. As the patient receives treatment, the nursing and clinical staff document the services provided to the patient manually and/or electronically. Clinical documentation is then used by qualified medical coders. He reviews the patient's file and assign the corresponding standardized codes to patient's episode. Based on the type of reimbursement model, using relevant fee schedule, a patient claim is then created with associated fees. Later in this presentation, we will look into an illustrative example on coding and grouping. Once all charges are posted on the patient account, the finance billing team finalizes the claim and prepare a bill. What happens next, it depends on the type of patient. For example, a self-pay patient will be presented with a bill which he or she must pay before discharge or leaving the hospital. For insurance and other third parties, the submission of claims process varies. Most of the insurers require care providers to submit the claim in an electronic format, either directly to their portals or in the form of compact discs or CDs. In certain cases, the cost of care is shared between the insurer or sponsor and the patient. This gives rise to co-payments where part of the fee must be paid directly by the patient to care provider. At the time of discharge or before leaving the hospital, patient is expected to settle any co-payments. With regards to submitted bills to insurance companies, it is common for insurance companies to make a payment on account of anywhere between 70 to 90% of total amount requested for payment. At the same time, the medical claim assessors of insurance companies review the details submitted. The claim assessors challenge certain costs and charges and deny or refuse proportion of the claim. Care providers then resubmit further information and negotiate the denials, also known as rejections. Once both parties settle on a final balance, difference between the payment on account and final negotiated balance is accepted as a liability or amount payable by the insurer or corporate to the care provider. The accounts receivable or collections team closely monitor all outstanding balances. As the payments are received, they register them against the relevant accounts. Generally, on a monthly basis, accounts receivable teams also send out statement of accounts showing all outstanding balances and follow up for payments. On a regular basis, the outstanding balances are also reviewed with senior leadership to assess any potential losses or uncollectible balances. The objective of an accounts receivable team is to maximize the collections and minimize the claim rejections or denials. Admissions team normally go through extra steps with self-paying patients before accepting them. In order to ensure that patient does not default or fail to pay the bill, a contract is signed between both parties. Admissions and billing teams also ensure that the estimated cost of care provided to patient and stated in contract is thoroughly reviewed and clearly communicated. It is also common for care providers to request for an advance or deposit payment on account. Most care providers also have defined thresholds, and once the charges on patient account exceed that threshold, billings team normally request for another advance or payment on account to bring the outstanding balance below the threshold. It is the responsibility of the clinical, medical, and billing teams to keep the patient's account balance updated and accurate at all times. Generally, there is a higher risk of non-payment from self-paying patients, especially if complexities arise during the course of admission. It is important for billing team to regularly monitor the build-up of charges and communicate with patients. In order to ensure appropriate charges are agreed with payor, A care provider must undertake detailed financial profitability analysis across all related medical, clinical, and nursing lines for the relevant payer. The main charge categories which are negotiated during contracting are as follows. For inpatients, daily room charges, ward supplies, oncology supplements, ITU, PCU, and transplant unit charges. For day cases, charges up to a certain number of hours and beyond, along with the cost of supplies and supplements. For primary and secondary procedures, charges for minor, inter, major, major plus, and various type of complex variations along with theatre packs are negotiated. With regards to the day surgery units such as endoscopy, charges for minor, inter, major with local and general anesthesia are negotiated. In addition to the charges mentioned above, the payment and discount rates are also negotiated. For any meaningful contractual negotiations, it is very important the charges on patient accounts are complete and comprehensive. I would like now to spend some time on patient level coding and groupings, which are the most important activities to make the whole RCM system work during the charge capture stage and funding. Until 1983, all patients deemed too unique with over 10,000 various diagnoses of diseases. Healthcare provision was considered too complex and complicated to measure. But in 1982, a landmark study was published by Fetter and Thompson, which examined 100 million inpatient records to understand clinical and cost variations. Patients with similar clinical conditions or diagnoses and similar resource consumption or cost were grouped under a specific diagnosis-related group, also known as DRG. This study led to the creation of first set of DRGs and clinical costing solutions. Down the line, the payers of care adopted DRG as a funding system to pay the same amount for patients in a specific DRG for simplicity and consistency. Over the years, DRGs have remained at the heart of various funding systems, such as fee-for-service in 1980s, fee per case in 1983, capitation, and other funding models. In order to achieve meaningful coding data and DRG classifications, it is important the clinical and medical teams maintain detailed notes relating to diagnosis of diseases, injuries, and comorbidities. In addition, all clinical and surgical interventions, along with complications, must also be recorded under the clinical documents. Here I would like to take you through an illustrative example of a newborn infant, starting from clinician notes, coder and grouper outputs, leading to patient-level costing. The child was born on 4th of January 2014 at 1325, gestation 39 weeks, sex female, weight and length 3680 grams and 51 centimeters respectively, APGAR scores 8 within 1, 9 within 5, method of delivery, spontaneous vaginal delivery with episiotomy and pudendal block. Examination of infant revealed port-wine birthmark on left shoulder, extending to nape of neck. No other abnormalities noted. Infant then developed transient physiologic jaundice on day 2. Admitted to special care nursery for phototherapy. Jaundice resolved on day 5 and phototherapy was ceased. Discharged home with mother on day 6. The medical coder receives the clinician notes and starts to code the information. In order to code correctly, a coder has a number of guidelines available to him. For example, ICD-10-AM or International Classification of Diseases Australian modification provides standardized way to code diagnosis. ACHI or Australian Classification of Health Interventions provides standardized way to code procedures, whereby ACS or Australian Coding Standards provides guidance on coding. Using the clinical documentation, the medical coder then codes the principal and additional diagnosis and principal procedure, in this case, phototherapy. The grouper solution then used the coded data along with ADT or admission, discharge, and transfer data and generates a DRG code relevant to the episode. This data is then fed into the costing platform for statistical and financial analysis. We will cover this in some more detail a little later in this presentation. As you can see from this example, the importance of keeping accurate clinical notes, and in the absence, the coding, grouping, and costing would all be misleading, and the decisions made by management on the back of this data would also be ill-informed. On this slide, I would like to share the relationship of a costing platform with the rest of information or management systems in an organization. Please note that the costing system sits right in the middle of all other systems. All the data and information captured in different parts of the system feeds into the costing platform. Once the data is received, the financial costing work begins. I am often being asked what are the specific clinical benefits of costing and how does it help the clinical and medical staff. The costing team matches the cost of care with clinical outcomes and helps with an understanding of care critical questions. Here are a few examples. Is there a repetitive pattern of adverse outcomes following a certain clinical protocol, resulting in complications and excessive cost? Number 2, the analysis of wider patient records helps identify protocols which generally result in better outcomes. Number 3, costing systems also provide a system of checks and balances. Care providers can assess the reasonableness of activities, for example, time spent in an ICU ward, need for a PET CT scan, and repetition of blood cultures, etc. Costing systems also help with quality agenda to ensure the clinical protocols are followed and any deviations from standard protocol are documented. Overall, the system helps the care providers better serve their patients, and that is what matters the most. Here is an illustrative example of 2 patients with same DRG classification with corresponding costing data for diagnostics, ICU, pathology, pharmacy, theatre, and ward charges. The clinical costing exercise for patient 1 came to a value of 2245, whereby for patient 2, came to a total of 2415 Saudi Riyals. There are significant variations in charges. Patient 2 had a higher use of path, ICU and wards, whereby patient 1 had a higher use of diagnostics and pharmacy. Now imagine you're agreeing a price or a budget for DRG 1. If you end up with a tough negotiator, he or she will pay you 2245, which is lower of patient 1 and 2, but really 2415. With luck, you might get away with a halfway house or an average that is 2330. As you know, getting the right level of budget or funding is essential for continuity of a clinical or medical service as well as the expansion. But whether you will get that funding or support comes down to financial data and its accuracy. Let's go through the costings work in a bit more detail. Once a patient is admitted, he or she will start to consume care providers' resources. The availability of resources cost money, and there are two types of costs: direct and indirect. Direct cost is something that can be directly tied to a patient. For example, nursing and consultant time, theatre or OR charges, ward charges, medical supplies and consumables, which all must be allocated to a patient episode. The other type of costs are indirect. These are something you cannot readily tie to a patient, but are essential for the hospital's management and infrastructure maintenance. For example, cost relating to board of directors and executive leadership, IT, finance, communications, project management, and marketing, etc. The costing function must take into account all the above to determine financial profitabilities. There are detailed financial methodologies to allocate costs to service lines, and details of those warrant another and longer session. So we will leave them for today. Here is a walkthrough illustrative example of a surgical patient's journey from the point of admission to the point of discharge. The illustration also shows the examples of resources being used at every stage and data collected for clinical documentation as well as for costing exercise. As a patient gets admitted, he or she is allocated a bed, gets attended by nursing staff, and provided meals by hotel services or catering team. Patient then goes through requested diagnostics, for example, PATs and scans, in dedicated facilities which are equipped with technicians and medical equipment. Once the results return, patient is booked for a surgery where a theatre surgeon, anesthetist, theatre packs, and other medical supplies such as prosthetics are also reserved. After the planned surgery, patient moves to recovery room and then back to the ward. The diagnostics continue, and once patient is stable and recovered, he or she is allowed to go home. As the patient is moving through different service areas, The clinical and medical teams keep track of all activities in patient notes. They record time spent on patient by all relevant staff, services provided, tests conducted with outcomes, use of medical supplies during admission, and dispensed at the point of discharge. Once a patient is clinically discharged, the information is good for use by finance costing team. In addition to cost, which were directly tied to patient, the costing team also keeps track of all indirect costs such as management salaries. Following different bases of cost allocation methodologies, these costs are allocated to patient episode. Similar exercises are conducted not only for a particular patient, but also for services, payors, consultants, and different hospitals within the same group. We have now done the hard work. The medical and clinical teams kept good records, coders and groupers did their job, and financial team performed good costing analysis. Let me share now how the leadership teams of care provider as well as payors will be using this data for decision making and performance appraisal. Charts above are an extract from the work done by the Grattan Institute. The charts provide a range of financial cost for two procedures: laparoscopic cholecystomy and hip replacements in different hospitals. Before we start reading the graphs, let me first briefly define median, which are the dark red data points on the graphs. Median is not a mathematical average. It is a midpoint with 50% probability of coming true. The organizations use median to avoid major deviations due to exceptional cases, which are also known as outliers. For example, let's say we have a procedure which costed 1,000 Saudi riyals in 5 cases and 5,000 Saudi riyals in only 1 case. The mathematical average in this case will show 1,700 Saudi riyals approximately, whereby median will still show 1,000 Saudi riyals, which is certainly a better representative. Let's now have a look at top left graph on laparoscopic cholecystomy. The cost ranges from $2,500 to $9,000. The range of medians is between $5,000 to $7,000. Few of the questions which will be coming to mind from medians reading are as follows. Why is the first hospital labeled ACT incurring more cost and the last hospital labeled VIC too little? Number 2, are the first 3 hospitals following protocols strictly, where the last 3 are cutting corners and putting patient safety at risk? Number 3, is the management team in last 3 hospitals most efficient in cost control and first 3 are more relaxed? Number 4, are the capital equipments in the last 3 are new and modern and the first 3 are still sweating old assets? Number 5, should we be directing more patient throughput to the last 3 hospitals due to lower cost instead of first 3? Number 6, is the data recording in last 3 hospitals accurate and reliable? Number 7, are the last 3 hospitals using better suppliers for procurement? Number 8, Are the first three hospitals normally receiving more complex cases, whereby the last three get minor cases? Number 9. Are the first three hospitals having to repeat tests because the admin team is inefficient? Number 10. What are the profit margins? Are the first three bleeding margin or maintaining profit margins despite the higher cost base? All these questions help management make better decisions by directing more funding and resources to better performing hospitals and putting in control measures for underperforming. After the last slide, I'm sure you must be getting tired of me now. I promise to keep this one brief. The graphs above show financial performance dashboard for orthopedic services line. If you are ahead of this department, on one page you can see the following. Revenue generated by a specific service as a percentage of total revenue generated by all service lines under your management. Average profit per inpatient or day case per service. Top procedures within a specific service. All of this again helps leaders to understand the profitabilities of different service lines and help build a case for further investment and funding. RCM is a major and integral part of all healthcare providers, looking to better manage their clinical and medical teams, provide better patient care, and do it all in the most cost-efficient manner. In order to set up a robust RCM system, care providers need to invest in IT systems, training, and develop a strong culture of timely and accurate recording of data. It is not possible to cover all aspects of RCM setup in one brief session. The topics I have excluded from this presentation are listed on this slide. I would like to conclude this presentation with a famous quote by Peter Drucker, who is seen as the man who invented modern business and widely regarded as the greatest management thinker of all times. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Thank you.